line. You might have too much of a stress hormone. Your blood sugar levels might be fluctuating too much. Whatever the case may be, your body is not in balance. And we can drill that down to a particular tissue, like the liver or the heart or the brain or whatever that tissue is. We can drill that down to a particular cell. We can drill that down to the enzymes and the biochemistry of that cell. We can drill it down even further to the DNA. All of that needs to be in balance in order for you to perform the best. So the reason that we feel energetic or fatigued, or happy or sad, or any of those kinds of things is because of some aspect of biochemistry. And that, I mean, that's about as nerdy as I'm going to get all night. Maybe a little nerdier, because I have a couple of data slides to show you. But that idea, I start off with that because I want you guys to understand that there's something going on in your body that is driving your health, and driving how you feel, and driving how you look, and driving everything about how we interact with the world around us. And it all comes back to this idea of balance, right? So that's a little bit abstract. That's a little bit out there, I think, maybe for a lot of people. So let's ask ourselves this question. What are some of the things that could unbalance us? What are some of the things that can take our body from this wonderful, nice, balanced place and make it go haywire? And here are a few of them right here. You can see some of the sources of imbalance or sources of cellular stress. And we've got just a few of them: emotional stress, physical stress, environmental stress, non-optimal diet. There's all sorts of stressors out there that can set our bodies out of whack. What do you think of all the ones I've got listed up here? What do you think is the most prevalent one? The one that affects the most people most of the time?
Processed foods.
Processed foods are pretty prevalent, right? You go to pull up to a four-way intersection, and on every of the four corners there's fast food. There's Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King and whatever, right? Every single place that you go. That's not the most prevalent thing.
Emotional stress.
Emotional stress, yeah, but any of those in particular? Deadlines, bills, traffic, there's all sorts of things. We just had Thanksgiving, that's an emotional stress right there, right, when all the family's over. This one, bills. Financial stress is the most prevalent. It's the one thing that's always there. You notice I don't have any, there's no earthquakes up there, there's no exploding volcanoes, there's no Hurricane Katrinas, that kind of stuff. These kinds of stressors are all what we refer to as chronic stressors. They're low grade, they're not life-threatening, at least today, right now. They might be life-threatening over time because they change how our bodies work. But the thing about them is that they're always there. They're always present. And with financial stress, it's always there in the back of your mind. It's something that it's the first thing you think of when you wake up for a lot of people. You know, I gotta get ready and go to the job, because if I don't, I'm not gonna get the paycheck, and then I can't pay the mortgage, and I can't pay the rent, and you know, I can't pay the cable bill. And every time you go to the gas pump, you know, even though gas prices are going down a little bit right now, it's still cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. That's a financial stress. Every time you go to the mailbox and you open it up, what's in the mailbox? Not love letters, right? Yeah, bills. And so it's always there with us, and it affects everybody. And so what happens when you're under these kinds of chronic stressors, your biochemistry changes. You could show me a biochemical printout from somebody, and I could see, oh, their cortisol, stress hormone is high, and their blood sugar levels might be fluctuating, and their free radicals, their oxidative load might be high. And I wouldn't necessarily know, is that person an overtrained, I don't know if you can see this, an overtrained athlete, because that's a particular kind of stress that we can measure. I wouldn't know if that person was someone who's dieting, someone who's cutting their calories to try to lose weight. I wouldn't know if they were just normally stressed out by life, or maybe they're a short sleeper. Do you guys know what that is? Are you familiar with that term? It's, well, I'll tell you, okay. So a short sleeper is somebody who gets about 6 hours of sleep a night versus what you're supposed to get, which is about 8. How many people would be in that boat, about 6 hours of sleep a night? Yeah, about 80% of the hands went up. That's great. That's about what you would expect. No big deal, right? Most people go, I would wish I could get 8 hours of sleep, but forget it. There's just no way I'm going to get that. And so if you think about what that 6 hours of sleep is doing to your body, if you compare that 6-hour sleeper, that short sleeper, to a normal sleeper around 8, the 6-hour sleeper has a 50% overexposure to cortisol, stress hormone. 50%, just because you missed 2 hours of sleep. You might go, well, no big deal. But we can trace that. We can follow those short sleepers over time, and we can say, here's your higher cortisol, now that's going to interfere with your blood sugar. It's going to interfere with your insulin control. So your blood sugar levels are going to fluctuate more than they ought to. That fluctuation of blood sugar now changes your appetite. So now you're hungrier for junk food. This is one of the reasons that at 10 o'clock at night you're looking into the pantry or the refrigerator and the potato chips are calling your name and the cake and the cookies. That's why you're hungry for those things, because of those fluctuations of biochemistry. As soon as you eat that food, that cortisol is now telling your belly fat to store more of those calories, and that's why these short sleepers tend to have more abdominal fat. They're basically, just because you lost that 2 hours of sleep, you're pre-diabetic. That's a pretty big deal, and people sometimes don't realize that kind of stuff. This is why I study biochemistry, because if we can figure out those little disruptions from those stressors, we can go in and we can use lifestyle interventions to rebalance you. We can remodulate that. And what happens is these people who are disrupted biochemically, they have the same biochemical disruptions, they have the same psychological outcomes, so they're tired and fatigued and maybe have brain fog and maybe have a little bit of depression and maybe have more appetite for junk food, that kind of stuff. But when we rebalance them, they have the same exact benefits. So athletes will have better performance. These short sleepers will lose weight and will have better appetite control. These dieters will be able to lose weight more effectively, especially from the abdominal region. And these stressed out people feel a lot better, and their depression indexes go down. So it's all tied together. And so I'll say that kind of stuff, and people will say to me sometimes. I have a lot of colleagues who will say, "Well, how about we just eat right and exercise?" Right? We eat more fruits and vegetables, and there's people who just roll their eyes and are kind of smiling and stuff. Why don't I do that, right? I'm probably not the first nutritionist who stood up here and said, we're probably not eating right, and you probably should eat better, and that kind of stuff. Why am I not talking about that right now? I will talk about that later. I'm a nutritionist after all. I want you to eat 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables. I want you to exercise on more days of the week than not. I want you to get 8 hours of sleep, not 6 hours. I want you to control your stress. I want you to do all these kinds of things. But I also want you to supplement, because this is the world we live in right here, right? Sometimes this is your dinner, a bowl of French fries and a Coke. This is the air we breathe sometimes. Maybe not quite that bad, but when the cars go by, whenever we're exposed to the sunlight, that's an oxidizing radiation. There's a lot of stuff around us, psychological stress, all those stressors I mentioned before. We can't really avoid those kinds of things. And so in the modern world, I think supplements are a necessary bridge from the perfect plan that you're supposed to be doing and the reality of that, the life that we actually lead. The supplements are a way for us to bridge that gap when we're not able to do all those things we know we're supposed to do. So, people ask me a lot of times, well, where do you get your ideas for the research studies that you do or the products that you develop? And a lot of it comes from traditional medical systems around the world. So this is an image from of Icarus from ancient Greek medicine. So that's a history of medicine that is 2,500 years old. Here's traditional Chinese medicine, which is 3,000 or 4,000 years old. Even older is Ayurvedic medicine, Indian medicine, that is a system of medicine of 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 years of tradition. And when you look at what they used herbs and roots and stems and teas and things like that, things from the natural world, not to cure diseases, but to rebalance the body. So those systems are all about balance. When I talk to my TCM colleagues and I say to them, what did you guys use 3,000 years ago to control stress? They'd go well, we didn't have that. We didn't have a word for stress 3,000 years ago. We didn't have a word for bills. We didn't have a word for, UV light or anything like that. What they had a word for, what would they do if they were trying to rebalance you in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine? Do you know the word they would use? What would they be trying to balance? Qi. Yeah, qi. It's spelled Qi. That's the life force. And every culture has a word for that. There's lots of ways to describe that. We might just call it energy. In TCM, it would be called qi. In Ayurveda, it's called prana. Sometimes, an athlete might say they were in the zone. You can see all these different ones here. As a scientist, I call it vigor. vigor in psychology research is, I forgot the definition of it. Here's the definition of vigor in psychology research. Three-tiered mood state characterized by physical energy, mental acuity, emotional well-being. It's not just energy, and it's not just focus, and it's not just feeling good. It's all of that wrapped up into one. It's really how people want to feel. In psychology research, does anyone know what the opposite of vigor is? There's a word for it. I know you know this word, because for whatever reason, this word is part of the public vocabulary now. Begins with a B. Burnout. Right? You've all heard that before, right? Maybe you've even used that word before. Burnout is the opposite of vigor. When these things are gone or low, when your energy is low and your mental acuity, your focus is not there, and you just don't feel good, that's burnout or low vigor. And so, you know, when you study vigor, I've studied vigor for 10 or 12 or 15 years, and I've written about it. When you study it, you can see that there's a lot of biochemistry that goes into it. So this is a word cloud from one of my books, The Secret of Vigor. The size of the word is indicative of how often it appears in the book. So vigor is the biggest word. But look at how important cortisol is. Look at how important stress is, and inflammation, and balance, and chronic glucose, oxidation, energy, etc., inflammation. All of these kinds of things impact your ability to be vigorous or not. Have high vigor or low vigor or burnout. So if we want to feel as good as we can, we need to have our bodies balanced. We need to, you know, it'd be very easy for me to stand up here and say, remember all those sources of stress? Just avoid those things and you'll be fine. Right? But again, unrealistic in the world that we live in. So how do we do that? One of the ways we do that is ask ourselves this question. So if we think of vigor as kind of analogous to just energy, right? Energy is a word that people use. Vigor isn't a word that people use. But energy is something people throw around all the time. If you actually drill down and ask people what their energy is all about, what you'll find is people will sense a low mood, right? They might be a little depressed. And they're not going to say they're depressed, but they will say that they're fatigued, right? They'll have that depression. So we can measure that depression in our studies, but that person will say they're tired. We can measure confusion in our studies, which is a mental acuity parameter. That person won't say that they're confused. They won't. Sometimes they'll say they have brain fog or something like that, but they'll most often say they're fatigued. When they're stressed out, they'll say they're fatigued. So there's so many triggers that people are saying are fatigued that aren't really fatigue. They're different aspects of psychology. And so if we could modulate all of those at the same time, people would feel better in all of these different ways, and they would come back to us and they would say, my energy is back. And it's funny when I've studied this for as long as I have, people will describe it in their own words. You know, we're able to measure it in our very sort of scientific ways with the psychological parameters that we do. And I'll show you some of that in a little bit. But people will come up and they'll say, the programs that we used to do before I came to Life Management end up being, 8 to 10 to 12-week intervention programs where we'd change somebody's diet, or we'd get them to sleep better, or we'd control their oxidation, or control their inflammation, or control their stress hormones, or something like that, and then we'd see how they felt. We'd be able to measure that biochemical parameter, and then we'd see how they were doing. And some, people would come up and they'd say, well, my energy is a lot better. I just feel like I've got a lot more get up and go. Somebody else would get up and they'd say, yeah, I'm there mentally, right? Clear as a bell now, whereas before I had the fog. And someone else would say something about their mood. And we had one class one time when a woman got up in the middle and she goes, I got the energy and I got the mood and my brain is back and she didn't have the word to describe how she was feeling in her body and her mind. And she wasn't going to say vigor, right? Because it was a study about vigor and she wasn't going to use that word. And she just kind of gave up. She didn't have the word for it. So she just goes, I don't know, I just know I'm getting a lot more vacuuming done. And everyone laughed and thought it was ridiculous, and she kind of shrunk down in her seat and disappeared. And I really singled her out. This was many, many years ago, and it stuck with me all those years because what I said to her was, that's it right there. That's vigor. That is this kind of motivation that you have back in your body, that you feel good enough to get up and do something, right? And so vacuuming, fantastic, right? If that's what she wants to do with that level of energy and that level of feeling good again, fine. But I think that people can do bigger things with that, right? If you feel that good, you're going to get up, maybe you're going to build a business. Maybe you're going to go volunteer at your church. Maybe you're going to be more present and active with your kids and your family. Whatever it is, maybe you're going to be more